Well, I'll tell you, you are in for a real treat on this edition of Our Little Corner, being taped on the 21st day of July, 1999, a little bit out of our normal bailiwick. We're in St. Lawrence County at a beautiful New York State campsite called Coles Creek, a place where my family has been camping for some 23 years for a couple of weeks every summer. It's right on the St. Lawrence River. The face of this area has changed considerably since the mid-1950s, which many of our viewers might know marked the advent of the St. Lawrence Seaway. And although behind Calvin about 200 yards is the current Route 37, the former Route 37 runs right through the middle of this campground. You'll see a stop sign down there. And to the right and left of that stop sign is an old macadam highway that dates back to the early 1950s, and that is the remnant of the old Route 37. As you may know, thousands and thousands of acres of prime farmland was inundated, flooded, to make a deep channel for the big ships to come through to the St. Lawrence Seaway. And when that happened, things were created. Farms were gone, new communities were recreated, and a campground was created in the 1950s called Coles Creek, and it's been one of the popular campgrounds in this area for a long, long time. Many of the campsites are in direct view of this spectacular St. Lawrence River that Arthur Godfrey wrote songs about, Florence on the St. Lawrence and the Thousand Islands song and others. And we're only about 61 miles from Alexandria Bay. This is where my family is camping this week, but Calvin and me and his wife Judy and Hometown Cable are going to take you up the road toward the Thousand Islands region 1 hour from here. We're going to take a launch ride from Alexandria Bay, that wonderful tourist area, Alexandria Bay and Clayton on the Thousand Islands. We're going to take a 2-minute trip to an island called Hart Island, where there is a fabulous castle called Boldt Castle. It's a charming story. Calvin got a little bit off the internet last night about it, but I'm very familiar with this facility, and by the time you finish with this edition of Our Little Corner, you will be too. Let me read you the first sentence or two. At the turn of the century, George C. Boldt, that's spelled B-O-L-D-T, millionaire proprietor of the world-famous Waldorf Astoria in New York City, set out to build a full-size Rhineland castle in Alexandria Bay on picturesque Hart Island. Don't you love it already? The grandiose structure was to be a display of his love for his wife Louise. Beginning in 1900, Boldt's family shared 4 glorious summers on the island and the Alster Tower, while 300 workers, stonemasons, carpenters, and artists fashioned the 6-story, 120-room castle complete with tunnels, a powerhouse, Italian gardens, a drawbridge, and a dovecote. Not a single detail of expense was spared. But then tragedy struck in 1904. Boldt telegrammed the island and commanded the workers to immediately, quote, stop all construction, because his wife had died suddenly. A broken-hearted Boldt couldn't imagine his dream castle without his beloved. He never returned to the island, leaving behind the structure as a monument to his love. 73 years, this castle and various stone structures were left to the mercy of the wind, the rain, the ice, the snow, and especially vandals who came to the island and just wreaked havoc with what remained of the castle, reminding you that it never was finished. Well, 22 years ago, the Thousand Island Bridge Authority acquired the property, and it was decided that through the use of all the net revenues from the castle operation, it would be preserved for the enjoyment of future generations. Since 1977, several $1 million have been applied to rehabilitating, restoring, and improving the Hart Island structures. And you're going to see a fabulous working project later in this program. Boldt Castle, Hart Island, Hometown Cable, on the road on Our Little Corner. Well, this is the dock at the bay, right here, Alexandria Bay. bustling tourist community for not only this century but well into the last century. And you can see the object of our quest across the beautiful St. Lawrence River. That is Hart Island, shaped in the rough outline of a heart if you were to look at it from the air. To the right you'll see the recently rebuilt power plant that was to supply power for Boldt Castle, and a walkway you can see between the trees, which is a tunnel that we will take you inside in just a short period of time, and Boldt Castle itself, which from here looks like a finished castle, but as you will find out in a very short period of time, it's still a work in progress. Behind this large Uncle Sam boat tour craft in front of us, there is the Alster Tower, part of the Playhouse, which you'll see they're in the process of restoring. We probably won't be able to climb to the top of it, but it's a very interesting structure all by itself, and was actually where the Boldt stayed for some time while the castle was under construction. We're expecting a launch to pick us up in a very few minutes. We'll take our trip and we'll take our tour of Boldt Castle in the summer of 1999 outside Alexandria Bay, New York. And we're at the dock on Hart Island with Shane Sanford, right?
That's correct.
Shane, thank you for letting us come out here and look at this wonderful castle today.
I'm glad to have you. It's a beautiful day out here today.
Oh man, the 21st day of July, spectacular weather. You couldn't order a better day than this for just about anything on the Thousand Islands.
I don't think you could. This is ideal weather for boating, for being on the river. It's beautiful.
It's a spectacular place for me. It has a lot of childhood memories, this entire area. Calvin and his wife have never been here before, but they're enjoying every minute of it. What's your association with Boldt Castle?
Well, I work for the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority, and of course they own and operate Boldt Castle and have owned Boldt Castle, the former George Boldt properties, since 1977, and have been involved in a long-term rehabilitation program since that time, expending nearly $14 million in improvements and rehabilitation efforts.
14 million so far?
14 million so far. We have covered an awful lot of ground. We will continue with the rehabilitation efforts. We're experiencing over 200,000 visitors a season here now. It truly is an international attraction. Visitors coming from all over the world. Tour boats arriving from both the United States and Canada. So it really is an international attraction, and again, visitations continue to increase, and visitation is in parallel with our many improvements here.
It is truly amazing, because I've made countless visits to this place from the 1940s until the present time. After 1977, changes really started to be made here in a big way, and I love it.
Well, that's certainly kind of you say that. Many visitors come here every year, every other year, and see the improvements that we continue with here at Boldt Castle. I think yourself, when you visit the main castle, you're going to see the grand staircase that was just completed about 2 weeks ago.
I saw photographs because my kids were up here for a wedding. They brought me photographs to show me what I was in for, and I was blown away.
Oh, it is. It's beautiful. It certainly is a signature piece of interior rehabilitation thus far to the main castle. And you mentioned weddings. We do about 40-45 weddings a season here at Boldt Castle.
Isn't that neat? As I drove up and showed Judy the gazebo, I said, that's where the wedding took place just a short time ago. She said, what a neat idea.
It is. It really provides a wonderful location for many wedding ceremonies here each year. They, of course, help bring more visitation. And it's just been a nice addition to our operating procedures here, in which we can allow now for wedding ceremonies to take place on the Hart Island grounds. It's nice, and it's been very well received by the public.
And I'm sure for many of our viewers throughout the North Country region, if they haven't been to Boldt Castle, they haven't been to the Thousand Islands area in 25 or 30 years, boy, are you in for a big surprise.
Yes, you are. Of course, there's been tremendous improvements here at Boldt Castle, as we've already discussed, but even myself, I've been here for 16 seasons.
Have you really?
I've been with the Bridge Authority for 16 seasons as their operations manager for Boldt Castle, and I myself look forward to each operating season because I know we have something new in store for the visitors coming this season. and it's a continuous improvement. Yes, the castle is still incomplete, but to see the wonderful improvements that are made each year that help draw people to this region, to this attraction, it's just a real success story now.
I don't have any idea how far you plan to go with this restoration.
Well, the castle was never completed. Some of the buildings on Hart Island were, such as the powerhouse, Alster Tower, and for instance, the powerhouse is 98% complete.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. The interior of the castle, we would like to finish all the first floor rooms, which contain the ballroom, the library, and the dining room, and the reception room, and billiards room. And some of those smaller rooms are complete, as well as the main staircase is now complete. So we'd like to complete those rooms on the first floor, and a typical bedroom suite or two on the second floor, maybe the observation deck on the fourth floor, put in the elevator, the elevator shaft.
I remember when it was full of rubble right to the top.
And that certainly was, and up until in the 70s, this is the condition that properties were. I think you would see an incredible transformation in these properties if you hadn't been here since the 70s. And you'll see a transformation in the properties if you hadn't been here since the 80s. And you'll see improvements if you were here just last year.
That's neat. Thank you so much for inviting us here today. We're going to start a little tour on our own. We'll join up with you later, and you can just show us around.
Enjoy to have you here in the Thousand Islands and at Boldt Castle.
Thanks so much, Shane. In the background, you'll hear a public address system on the Rockford boat tours in French. Their tourists come here from the four corners of the globe and from many parts of northeastern New York and Canada, because after all, we are on the international boundary line between the United States and Canada here in northern New York. I might say that when I first began coming here as a small child in the 1940s, there was mostly just rubble outside this building. None of these beautiful bricked pathways existed in those days. None of these beautiful flower gardens, none of the picnic areas and benches, just rubble in and around this beautiful Boldt Castle, because as we told you before, it was abandoned in the early part of the century when the woman for whom it was being built died unexpectedly. And through the years since 1977, since Thousand Islands took it over, the changes have been massive. As you look at the castle, you'll see much of the roofing material has been replaced. All of the windows and window casings have been replaced and or restored. You can see, if you look carefully at the stonework on the outside of the castle, that a great deal of stonework, they call it pointing up, has been done to make it safe. And inside, it's even more tremendous. So there are a lot of things to see and do on Hart Island and Boldt Castle today, and I hope you will enjoy this free tour on your public access channel. I'm not sure if Calvin stopped just because he was tired or if he thought we ought to get another view of the outside of the castle, but we've stopped part way up. You don't have to be a mountain goat. It's a gradual slope as you climb up these brick walkways to the Boldt Castle from the outside. Most of the rooms are now open. I should tell you, when I first began coming here, and even when I brought my young children here in the 60s and 70s, a huge number of the rooms were simply blocked off and boarded up because they were unsafe. The floors were unsafe, the ceilings were unsafe. Now that's not true. Just about everything is wide open and is being restored. You can see that large picture window with flower pots in front of it that didn't even exist when I first began to come here. So there are treasures inside. The grounds themselves are treasures. The grounds crews have been working here for years. There's a giant picnic area to the right of our cameras where people can stop, bring their sandwich lunches, or get a snack from the snack bar down below, and just stop in. Boat tours come here from all over the North Country. There are tours from both Alexandria Bay, Clayton, and Cape Vincent along the St. Lawrence River, from Gananoque and other places on the Canadian side. So you'll see many tour boats coming past this area in the course of a day. And as we heard from Shane Sanford a few minutes ago, who administrates this island, there Canadian people, especially in the province of Quebec, are starting their 2-week holiday, as they call it now, so this place will be bubbling with activity. When you're dropped off here during a boat tour, for the most part, you can take a boat back at any time throughout the day to get back to Alexandria Bay if that's the place you've chosen as your home port for a vacation. And they announce when the boats are leaving, and you simply come down and get on your boat and take a shuttle back to Alexandria Bay. And it's just doesn't even take 2 minutes to get over here by boat from Alexandria Bay, and you saw that shot from the dock as we waited for Shane to pick us up. We'll walk around the castle, inside and outside, and give you the Cook's Tour of Boldt Castle, summer 1999. We're now standing at the base of Boldt Castle, shooting across the water at the Yacht House, or the Boat House, which has been partially restored in the last 22 years as well. And before we finish our tour of Hart Island and Boldt Castle today, we hope to take you on a little tour of the Yacht House as well. So stay with us on our little corner. Generally, a view like this would be seen only in Europe at some castle in Austria or Germany or Prague, Czechoslovakia, but here in the United States we have Boldt Castle, our own treasure. I think it ought to be a national treasure, but for the most part, in the meantime, it's a treasure for people here in the North Country, in northern New York State and St. Lawrence County, to come and view. Kind of a spectacular view from the ground floor up 4 levels here at Boldt Castle, and we hope to see at least a little bit of most of Boldt Castle before this tour is finished today. Just to give you a general idea about how much restoration has been done and is being done since the Thousand Islands took this over 22 years ago, just look around at the new cement between the stonework on the outside of this castle. You can see the cracks that still exist, and you know that that portion will ultimately be rehabilitated. When you walk up on the little plaza here, you will see some amazing stonework, and you look at the ceilings and you can see where the giant bolts are on there to hold it together, and you'll see new portions of a wooden ceiling up and over to the right which have been installed in recent years. And imagine how much work that took just to bring the building materials over to this island and then install them. To the left of that, you can see the ceiling in various stages. You can see some old wood, you can see some old stonework above, and get an idea just how much of a job it is to get this restoration going here on Hart Island. And most people would visit a place like this once or twice in their lifetimes. For me, the charm is to come back year after year after year and marvel at the progress that has been made in the intervening 12 months. Many of the original materials to build Boldt Castle came over on the ice in the wintertime. For those people who may not be aware of it, the ice in much of the St. Lawrence gets very, very thick. And they keep the channels open for a long season through the St. Lawrence Seaway, but sometimes the ice will get 10 or 12 feet thick in other areas of the St. Lawrence River, and of course you could drive across them. In the 1950s, I would go to horse races on the St. Lawrence River, and they would use big D8 Caterpillars to clear the snow, so you know it was safe to walk on them. Just another view from outside Boldt Castle on Hart Island in the Thousand Islands area across from Alexandria Bay. This is a view of Alster Tower, also known as the Playhouse, where the Boldt family lived for some time during construction of Boldt Castle. It's being restored a little bit at a time, and I can't wait to take you inside to see what has transpired since I was there about 2 years ago. Calvin's wife Judy talked with a couple who said they hadn't been here in 13 years and they were blown away. They said they were not even able to get in the tower at all the last time they were here. You'll see what used to be, or what was intended to be, actual bowling alleys, which were pretty much completed back in the early days downstairs, and then stairways that go all the way up the outside of this tower right to the top, and we'll see what we can see later on. To the left of the Alster Tower is that gazebo I mentioned that has been used for quite a few weddings, including one friend of my family just a couple of weeks ago. And what a delightful place to be married in or at on Hart Island here in the Thousand Island region off Alexandria Bay. Let's go inside and take a look around. If Mr. Boldt and his wife were around today, they would be pleased, I think, at what is quickly becoming a finished product, as you're now looking at the grand staircase inside Boldt Castle. This alone, with its marble steps and hardwood railings, is worth the entire trip for me today. And I walked into this entrance room and I took a deep gasp, because I haven't seen this finished this way. It's truly incredible. I hope you get an opportunity to come and visit Boldt Castle on your own, even though this is probably a 2-hour program today. You will not begin to see all of what Boldt Castle is like inside and outside. The grand staircase has only been completed within the last 2 weeks, as we're taping this on the 21st of July, 1999. So by the time you get here, it will have been actually open to the public for only a relatively short time. When I first came here well over 50 years ago, it was just a tangle of metal and was almost completely unsafe, and you had to use alternate means to get upstairs by wooden staircases. Now, totally different. Look at the ceilings. Look at the work they're doing way up on the dome up above. Look at the moldings. Look at the ceiling cornices. Look at the woodwork, and be amazed that they've been able to find artisans, because Mr. Boldt brought the finest artisans from various countries in Europe and the United States to start the work on this castle way back in the early part of this century. And when you believe that none of the formal work was done after 1904, that's even more cause to be thrilled by what you see when you come inside Boldt Castle today. We'll continue our tour, and I hope we'll begin with number 1 on the brochure, which is the billiard room. Some of the areas are numbered. In the old days, there were things scrawled on the walls in paint to tell you what you were looking at, because most of the rooms inside Boldt Castle were relatively the same and completely unfinished. But now, you get a published brochure when you come inside, and it starts with number 1. And number 1 is the billiard room. Take a look around here and imagine what it would have been like to play a game of billiards or pool here in 1902, 1903, 1904. See what it looks like today, because most of the restoration here is faithful to the original plans. And as we can see on the easel in front of us, it says the restoration of the antique bevel-style Brunswick billiard table, which is circa 1895 to 1915, was made possible by the generous donation of time and materials by various people, including Brunswick Billiards and their authorized dealer, Gary Pools and Leisure in Clarence, New York, and others. So it's kind of neat. I don't think we'll be playing a game of pool on there today. Probably they'd take us out by the ears if they caught us over this railing. But take a look at this parquet flooring and tell me that's something you'd want to try to do in your own pool room. Thousand Islands is not sparing the expense. They're waiting until they get enough money to make it. And you look at the base of the pool table, and you'll see that's probably plexiglass, wouldn't you guess, in the shape of a heart. But as you travel through Boldt Castle, you'll see lots of things in the shapes of hearts. You have to sometimes look to catch the heart shape. You'll see it in some of the stained glass windows. There was a backward B as we moved into the building. And as you look around this room, you'll see something that you would be proud to have in your own house, but this room itself is the size of a small house. We'll see a lot more as we continue the tour of Boldt Castle. This is the reception room, and when I first began to bring many of my little and Baker children to this place on vacation many years ago, this room was completely sealed off. But I have to tell you, at the risk of going to jail for past transgressions, that there were ways to sneak into this room underneath the boards and look around. Of course, it was nothing as you view it now. It was in a very bare bones condition in the process of being built when work stopped here, but there were kegs and kegs, wooden kegs and boxes full of building materials, many of which have been used in the process of rehabilitating this castle. This is called the reception room, and if you take the tour of Boldt Castle, you will find this is number 2 on the agenda. There's the stained glass with the monogram B for Boldt inside a heart. Beautiful stained glass right near the entrance to Boldt Castle. There are small and large fireplaces in almost every room, although I believe the castle did have a large steam boiler, or perhaps more than one. Near this fireplace, over this fireplace, in the giant foyer as you enter near the grand staircase, you can see progressive pictures of the restoration of the grand staircase. To the left, a view of what it looked like when I first began here. Later steps made of wood, and then finally midway through the recent construction, and ultimately the picture on the right is precisely the way the grand staircase looks today. I have to tell you that I'm easily amazed, and some friends of mine at Coles Creek told me I would use that word often today, as I do, because I have a childlike curiosity about life in general, and I am amazed by lots of things, and this grand staircase inside Boldt Castle truly amazes me. Just to take a look at all the fine work that's been done, the tasteful lights, the chandeliers on the first floor, and the ceiling work on the second floor. And you can see beyond the balcony on the second floor parts of the areas that are not finished, just to give you an idea how much work there is in store before this first and second floor could ever be completed. It's kind of neat. We've entered from the front vestibule into another beautiful restored room in our tour of Boldt Castle, and this is the dining room. You can see some photographs with, again, the monogram of the heart with the B inside. You can see on a lower photograph what some of the outside balconies looked like. When I said they were dangerous, they were until these restorations were completed. This dining room is truly spectacular, and the fact that unlike many museums and even restorations such as this, the general public is able to walk into this room, and although they're asked not to touch the fabulous pieces that are here, they can walk up very close to them. And some of these pieces may date back well beyond the time when Boldt Castle was constructed, because even in those days, people who had the wherewithal to do it would import antiques, ancient antiques from Europe, especially if they were building something like this. There is a spectacular view. When we were on our way up here, we told you about this beautiful window. To the left here in the dining room, you'll see a cabinet with some mighty fine china. And everywhere you look in this room, there's something that catches the eye, not to mention the size of this fabulous table, which is not unlike tables from the 1500s, the likes of which were inside the Coe Estate on Long Island, where I began school at what is now called Stony Brook in the late 1950s, where planting fields and the Coe family had imported wonderful old antiques. There is George himself. a picture you'll see numerous times because adjacent to this dining room is a video being shown now. We didn't want to catch the video while it was being shown, so we'll wait till it starts again. I saw Judy looking at this unbelievable sideboard. Is that what you'd call that? That hutch or sideboard to one side? Is that the most unbelievable work you've ever seen in your life? And if Calvin will follow me around, you'll get an idea how these original furnishings are in here. Take a look at this dining room. So now we know how it was restored. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority got the original Boldt family dining room furnishings and accessories. The great-grandchildren of George and Louise Boldt have made a permanent donation of some of the Boldt family antiques to the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority. The donators, Mrs. Glover, Clover Weller, Athens, Georgia, Sandy Morissette, Delray Beach, Florida, Carolyn Southard of Connecticut, presented furniture and accessories for display purposes at Boldt Castle on Hart Island. This is kind of neat. Actual items that were used by the Boldt family who built this thing almost in another century as we approach a brand new millennium in our own. This is just a poster that's part of a door inside the dining room to give you an idea what Hart Island is actually shaped like. I told you before, it's in the general shape of a heart, and you can see some of the landmarks we've mentioned, including the Alster Tower in the foreground and the powerhouse in the background, the docking areas, the original gate, and Boldt Castle itself, along with the adjacent islands and many of the other islands that add to the beauty and the spectacular nature of the Thousand Islands region here in northern New York and Canada. There's so much to see and feel and smell inside Boldt Castle. There are numerous displays so the public can be fascinated. There are a lot of things to titillate the mind and the eye when you come in here, including old photographs and old plans, as you see here of the Boldt Castle. And in one of the legends, it says in August of 1900, Boldt announced that architect William Hewitt of the Philadelphia firm of Hewitt and Hewitt had drawn plans for a mammoth cottage. I would say that's the understatement of the century. And that was to replace his existing mansion on Hart Island. And he moved the original house to Wellesley Island, converted it into a clubhouse for the 18-hole golf course he had built there in 1899. And the massive stone castle was planned for here, with carved Italian mantelpieces, draperies, tapestries, mosaics, chandeliers, paintings, sculptures, and furniture, all purchased in Europe to decorate this dream castle, built as a gift of love by George for his wife Louise. You know parts of the rest of the story. I don't want to give away all of it, but I've already given you a preview. But it talks a great deal to what love was like when somebody had the money to express it, to build a home for Louise. And the whole place, as you know, after Louise died, just fell into disrepair. And you'll hear a lot of the story as we go in to check the video later on to see how this place got to where it is today, how Mr. Boldt got his money, and what happened to all of that over time from the early part of the 1900s until the very end of this century.
And in the video, Mr. Carroll says, the Bridge Authority don't intend to complete it.
Yeah.
We'll bring it back, but Mr. Boldt has gone by that point. We're going to continue running it as a museum. Your money will go into it. We'll be working on the Playhouse. The Playhouse, they lived in the Playhouse. It was built as a place to entertain guests while they lived in the cottage. So the cottage is going, as I said, the name of it. So, and it's it's wonderful. The flowers we get from the Bridge Authority. We thank you for waiting, and we hope you will.
Thank you.
Copies of this video are available for purchase on the second floor of the castle and at the souvenir shop on the boat docks. George Charles Boldt was born on April 25, 1851, on the Isle of Rugan in the Baltic Sea. George was brought up in a middle-class family and educated in the schools on Rugan. Determined to work his way through medical school, George emigrated to America in 1864 at the age of 13. By himself and alone in New York City with very little money, he landed his first job in the kitchen of the Merchants Exchange Hotel. He worked in the kitchens of other New York hotels while eagerly applying to medical schools. But when he was not accepted to any medical school, he had to give up his dream of becoming a surgeon. But the lure of the Wild West had started to call to him. He saved his pennies and bought a ranch in Texas. Fortune did not smile on him, however. A torrential spring flood swept away everything he owned, including his cattle. Penniless, George made his way back to New York City to start again. And once again, he landed a job in the kitchen of a New York establishment. But this time, George didn't stay in the kitchen for long. His good manners and friendly personality helped move him up. He cultivated the rich clients that came into Parker's restaurant, and one rich client offered him the chance to run his hotel in Cornwall on the Hudson. From there, George turned his sights to Philadelphia and the World's Fair. George became assistant manager of the prestigious Clover Club of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was at the Clover Club that he met and fell in love with Louise Carer. The two married on June 14, 1877. The two couldn't have been a more perfect match. The daughter of William Carer, who managed the Clover Club, Louise knew every function of the hotel and restaurant business. She was gracious and charming and made friends easily. Combined with George's outgoing personality, the two were unstoppable. Together, the Boldts opened and ran Philadelphia's Bellevue Stratford Hotel, which became very exclusive and nationally famous. And together with William Waldorf Astor's financial backing, they built, opened, and operated the world's most famous hotel, the Waldorf Astoria. With the Waldorf Astoria, the Boldts revolutionized the hotel and restaurant industry. At a time when it was considered improper to entertain outside the home, George succeeded in making the Waldorf the in-place to see and be seen. The Waldorf was the site of some of the Gilded Age's most extravagant balls. The Boldts introduced the idea of room service, fresh flowers in all the rooms and on every table of their 5 restaurants, and of newspapers in every room. George was one of the first to believe that the customer was always right. A hotel of this stature had to be stocked with only the freshest vegetables and finest meats. And to ensure a steady, dependable supply, George started Wellesley Island Farm on Wellesley Island in the Thousand Islands of northern New York State. The Boldts had been introduced to the Thousand Islands by friends in 1894 and had fallen in love with the area. Louise, who was reputed to be in poor health, found summers in the Thousand Islands to be therapeutic. She especially enjoyed the breeze off the St. Lawrence River. In addition to Wellesley Island Farm, they purchased other land in the Thousand Islands, eventually owning over 3,000 acres. One of their purchases was Hart Island for $10,000 in 1895. Hart Island's previous owner, E. Kirk Hart, had built a beautiful summer cottage on the island, in which the Boldts and their 2 children spent several summers. George spent thousands of dollars on additions and renovations to both the house and the island. One of the first things he did was change the spelling of the island's name from H-A-R-T to H-E-A-R-T. He had the outline of the island altered to further resemble the shape of a heart, and a grand arch greeted visitors to the island. George also started construction on Alster Tower in 1896. Standing on the edge of the island, the tower was built primarily for recreation purposes and is sometimes called the Playhouse. The tower was completed and opened on July 15, 1899. George had always admired the Rhineland castles of his youth in Germany. In fact, Alster Tower may have been modeled after a castle on the Rhine River. But as Alster Tower neared completion, George began thinking of castles on a much grander scale. He imagined a beautiful castle nestled atop Hart Island, surrounded by Italian gardens and the crystal waters of the St. Lawrence. And he imagined his beloved wife, Louise, gliding down a fabulous staircase like a princess in a fairy tale castle. He would build that castle, and he would present it to Louise as a Valentine's Day gift. So in 1899, George commissioned the architectural firm of Hewitt, Stevens & Pace of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to design his castle. The architects were told that expense was a minor consideration, and the plans called for 11 buildings, of which the castle would be the focal point. The original wooden cottage on Hart Island was dismantled, and part of it was transported across the frozen St. Lawrence to become part of the golf house of the Thousand Islands Country Club. In 1900, work started on the castle itself. The granite castle would be 6 stories high from the foundation to the highest tower room, and would be 75 feet long and 115 feet wide with 127 rooms. The exterior of the castle is of an ashlar patterned granite stone. To assure a steady supply of matching materials, the granite and the sand used in mixing the mortar were obtained from George Boldt's own quarries on Oak Island, 10 miles away. A crew of 150 men were employed in getting the stone for the construction of the house. A railroad was set up on Oak Island to make removal of the stone easier. The granite and sand were then loaded onto large barges and transported to the castle. The head stone cutter cut the stone to exact specifications as he carefully followed the plans for the house. Each stone bore a mark as to where it was supposed to go. His work was so precise that after being transported to Hart Island, supposedly not one stone needed any alteration. Most of the work on the castle was done by a force of 300 men employed by George Boldt. George worked the heart theme throughout the entire island. There are hearts carved in stone, hearts molded in plaster, hearts made from cast iron, and hearts carved in wood. Beautiful Italian gardens were planted, and the hennery was built to house George's favorite fowl. 4 years had passed since the work began on the castle. It was only a year and a half away from completion when tragedy struck. In January of 1904, a telegram arrived at the office of the superintendent of construction. All the work on the castle was to be stopped. Louise Boldt was dead at age 42. The exact cause of Louise's death has remained a mystery, but she had been in delicate health for some time, and some accounts say consumption was to blame. The Boldts had been married 26 years. Within an hour, the uncompleted house was transformed from a scene of busy activity to a tomb of quiet. Silence descended upon the castle as the workmen put down their tools and left. Over $2.5 million had been spent on the castle. The house that had been George and Louise's dream was left to the mercy of time and the elements. After Louise died, George never returned to their castle. Instead, he devoted his time to his hotels and other business ventures. He kept up his interest in the Thousand Islands, however, and among his land holdings were 6 islands and several hundred acres of land on Wellesley Island. George Boldt died on December 5, 1916, in the Waldorf Astoria of heart failure attributed to overwork. He left his estate worth about $20 million to his 2 children, George Jr. and Louise Clover, and to his 3 grandchildren. He was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, next to his beloved wife. His children ran their father's estate after his death. After World War I, in 1922, George Jr. and Louise Clover Boldt Miles sold Boldt Castle and other Thousand Island properties to Edward J. Noble, inventor of Lifesavers Candy. Noble opened the castle to the public, starting the tradition of tours visiting the castle. but he left it unprotected, both from the elements and the public. And both left their marks. Graffiti covered the walls, vandals broke windows, and years of snow and ice, wind and rain left roofs leaking, walls crumbling, and floors sagging. During World War II, salvageable materials such as plumbing and electric from the castle and surrounding buildings were either sold or stolen for the war effort. Eventually, nearly everything of any value was taken from the castle. In 1977, Edward Noble's estate gifted the castle and other Boldt properties to the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority. The Bridge Authority immediately began a stabilization plan to prevent further deterioration of the castle. The plan has entailed rebuilding roofs and walls and replacing all the windows. Everything has been done as close to the original as possible, but cost is a factor that must be considered, and the authority has used modern materials when practical.
And right in the midst of the video, you were watching, our battery died, and so we watched the rest of the video ourselves without replacing it and began the tour once again so you can get a bird's eye view of the inside of Boldt Castle. The video continued to talk about how original materials were used when practical and modern materials were used in the interest of conserving money, because George Boldt was not interested in conserving anything when he built this wonderful place way back in the early part of this century and in the century that preceded this one. We're in number 9 if you were to come in here and check your brochures. This is the library, and you can see this original mantle and fireplace, which is rather spectacular. It hasn't been very much restored, so you can see what it would have been looked like. To Calvin's left, as we came into the room, you can see a piece of imported mahogany veneer wainscoting, which was a group of paneling stored in original crates. And that paneling was the paneling initially intended to be installed in this room. It's nice to be able to walk into a room like this so you can see how progress is made from the beginning to the final completion of restoration at various rooms in the castle. You can see what the walls were made of. You can see the original brick inside the wall. You can see plastic coatings. You can see the remnants of the original electrical wires. This had steam heat at one point, although there were a number of fireplaces in here. You can see in some of the rooms some of the old radiators, steam, the hot water radiators that were used. And you can see in the ceilings here some of the original work and how the plaster was initially applied, and so it's a good idea that they leave an occasional room this way to give you an idea how progress takes place. So this is what the library looked like. This is what might be affectionately known as your home entertainment center. Today you might have a multi-use room. In these days you had in those days you had some kind of a pipe organ or an orchestrion, whatever. And this is an S.T. Reed organ circa the 1860s, typical of the type of musical instrument they used back in those days. And it says here that Bob and Clark Hicks and family of Teresa, New York, made a permanent donation of furnishings originating from the Thousand Islands for display purposes at the Yacht House. And we hope to go to the Yacht House. Over here to the right, you'll see something that was familiar in a lot of the North Country homes and in homes all around the United States. And this is your typical home type or church type pump organ. The pedals down below were how you supplied air to the bellows to make the organ work. And this one was not indigenous to this house, but was donated by William Hale of Gananoque, Ontario. I mentioned that's a familiar stopping place as well for people on the Thousand Islands boat tours. And we're on the landing of the second floor, just above the grand staircase, which has only recently been restored. Spectacular job, and we understand from people who work here for the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority that the carpenters and contractors only left this site about a week ago. So when we tell you this is a work in progress, we're not kidding. The difference is just in the last 2 years since I was a visitor to Boldt Castle on Hart Island are truly amazing and inspirational. We're up on the second floor. There are several levels to this building, and you can see up to the third and fourth floors in a beautiful dome, which ultimately will be restored. On the second floor, you'll see in a few moments Mr. Boldt's bath and bed chamber, Mrs. Boldt's chamber, Mrs. Boldt's bath, Miss Boldt's chamber and bath, Miss Boldt's reception room. 21 and 22 on our list are guest chambers, and you'll see guest chambers and stairways up to the third and fourth floors. And behind me, if Calvin can just do an about face, you will see what remains of the elevator shaft. And our viewers and my readers in a weekly column in the Press Republican know I've referred to this elevator shaft on numerous occasions. And when I first visited this place, this entire opening was boarded up, and you could just peek between the boards and know that it was an elevator shaft, but it was completely full from the ground floor to the top with rubble. Countless tons of construction rubble. And before anything could be done in this building, all that rubble had to be removed and taken away from the island, and that was no small effort. We'll get a chance to look into some of the finished rooms and some of the not finished rooms on the second floor as we continue our tour of Boldt Castle. If you talked with people who made a tour to Boldt Castle on purpose or as part of one of the Thousand Islands boat tours in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, you might have heard some people expressing disappointment at seeing an unfinished castle. For me and for my children growing up, it was part of the charm. What you see in this room is simply almost the way it was left when construction on Boldt Castle was stopped in the early part of this century. The rooms were stabilized, solid wooden floors were added, and the rooms were partially painted over. And some of the ceilings received some stucco work, some plaster work, just as I said, to stabilize it so pieces of the building would not fall onto your head. But most of the 120 some odd rooms in this castle look precisely as you see this one not unlike the other except for size and shape depending on what its intended purpose was. So you can see if the plan is to restore and then build every room on this second floor to what it would have been had the castle been completed, you can well imagine. Think in terms of the perspective of time. Back in the early 1900s, you saw perhaps in the video that Mr. Boldt had already spent in excess of $2 million in building the castle. Since 1977, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority has already spent in excess of $14 million just for stabilization and restoration. So who knows what's going to happen, but the more people like you who visit Hart Island and Boldt Castle and put your dimes and dollars into this tax-exempt museum, the better it's going to be when you bring your children and grandchildren back after the next few years. You can just imagine the thousands of small eyes and large eyes from people big and small who have peered out of these windows of Boldt Castle over the years as tourists. Now if you'll just use that wonderful imagination of yours to go back in time and imagine what it would have been like for family members to peer out these windows, for construction people who were building this castle back in the early part of this century to take a look out and say, wow, look at what we've done. And then imagine the tremendous shock it would have been to the family and to others to have construction immediately stopped, and with hours, people leaving the island. Tremendous view from every single window here, and I have to tell you that my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, many of them have been inside this castle and have peered out these windows, running from room to room and trying to find Ma and Grandma out there, and she's running around with cameras and putting lenses on to get a better picture of the little ones as they go about from place to place. Little people seem to have greater imagination than big people sometime, and so maybe we ought to learn from the little ones and watch them as they run through Boldt Castle and try to capture the glory that it could have been back in 1904. Take a look at this tree that caught our eye from this vantage point. There's a new view from every single window here, and we just kind of look around the grounds and marvel at how much progress has been made in the last 20 or so years since we began coming here. Actually, we began coming here long before that, but in the last 22 years since the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority has taken over and has made some of these wonderful changes to Boldt Castle and the surrounding grounds. As I've said several times in the course of this program, when my family first began to explore Boldt Castle many years ago, much of the castle itself was unsafe for tourists, and yet we were able to wiggle through small openings and doors and broken pieces of wood to enter some of the areas where thousands of these barrels containing the imported materials to be used in the construction of Boldt Castle were stored. This is one of the original stave barrels of imported tile packed in wood shavings that was brought here probably right around the turn of the century in 1900. And many of those existed. You can see the pieces of ceramic tile inside. There were also barrels, hundreds of barrels of octagon-shaped ceramic pieces to be used in various work throughout the castle. It's kind of neat that you're able to see what some of the original things look like, and some of the accoutrements that were planned in the construction are preserved for you. Although this looks like metal, these pieces inside this cabinet, it's actually hand-carved oak art, typical of the area, and these pieces were almost all found on the grounds of Boldt Castle. In an adjacent frame right to the left of this, you'll see those octagon-shaped pieces that I mentioned, the white marble floor tile. Most of that was for use in the bathrooms. You'll see some of the original lighting fixtures for those people who are electricians. You'll see the push-button fixtures, a tool that was used in construction of Boldt Castle inside here. Some of the original and fancy plaster work in another cabinet to our left as we work in a counterclockwise fashion around the room. And to think that artisans could be found in 1999 to continue and to replace this work is kind of amazing. And the view outside on this spectacular summer day, July 21st, 1999, makes Calvin and me and Calvin's wife Judy glad to be alive, and I hope you, in viewing this, whenever you see it, it'll inspire you, and maybe you'll take a visit one of these days with your family to the Thousand Islands. And as you can easily see from this point, the grand staircase only goes from the first floor to the second floor. We have to take adjacent staircases on both sides to get up to the next level. And you can see that they're temporary staircases, but at least more of the castle is accessible now than ever was in the past, and a lot of the plaster work as we just look up into the third floor is now completed. It is rather nice. I cannot wait until they finish all the dome work up above to see what that might look like at some point in the distant future. The view is more pleasing as we rise in Boldt Castle onto the 3rd floor, and you look up and down the St. Lawrence River. You can see tour boats and pleasure boats. Outside the perimeter of Boldt Castle, you can see the Welcome Arch, the one you saw pictures of in its heyday when Boldt Castle was being constructed, when visitors came to this island. Even while this island was in the state of change, when the old house was taken away and the new house was being built, many people came and stayed in the Alster Tower to the left of the archway as guests. So that was the guest house, otherwise known as the Playhouse. So there were a lot of people besides the hundreds of workmen who were engaged to complete Boldt Castle. There were many people playing about this island even during those days. Life was quite a bit different, but in some ways much the same in the Thousand Islands region back in the 1800s, as many people used this as a playground during the summer months and even during the winter months in the last century. It's changed, as I said, now because of modern technology. The boats are faster getting here, but there are still lots of tourists who come from thousands of miles around from other countries in Europe and Canada and parts of the United States just to visit this intriguing Thousand Islands region. And I think you'll agree during and after this tour that one of the great places to stop and have a good long look around and maybe a picnic lunch with your family and grandma and grandpa is Boldt Castle on Hart Island. This is the 4th floor, otherwise known as the attic. What you're looking is at the top of the dome that you had to look at from way down on the ground floor when we first began. The dome skylight up above, this is all being planned for restoration, but you can see a lot of the original construction, huge steel I-beams and copper work. Some of the plaster on the dome has already been repaired. I was told by family members who came here for a wedding just a short time ago that this portion of the restoration was being done, and there are observation windows all the way around, which makes it even better. There are several things on this level. Some servants' quarters, there's an observation deck, a reading room, a stair up to the loft. We'll take, yes, there is another floor, it's called the loft, which is just about a half level up from this one. But I've always imagined since I was a little boy what this might have looked like had this skylight and this dome been completed, and I think we're getting a sneak preview in 1999. It'll be rather spectacular maybe the next time we take our tour of Boldt Castle.
And Gordy, the scary part for me is there's graffiti up above these steel rafters here.
Think about that. As I look onto the roofs of many of these rooms that are 15 and 20 feet high, I said that either, you know, Wilt Chamberlain and his grandson and great-grandson got on each other's shoulders and got to the ceiling, or they had some kind of a ladder with them. I don't know how they got up there in the old days. But as I told you, me and my children did some fancy exploring here myself way back when. I must tell you, though, that I don't believe I've ever written on the walls at Boldt Castle, nor have I made a conscious effort to destroy anything here, because I think this is a wonderful treasure. Calvin's comment was, before starting the cameras, we walked out onto the observation deck on the 4th floor of Boldt Castle, was, this is hard to take. On this beautiful day, toward the last week in July of 1999, we're standing out in 80-degree temperatures, relatively low humidity, looking at the top of Boldt Castle from almost the very top. We're outside the 4th floor. You can see much of the restoration that's been done. Many of the tiles on the roofs have been replaced. A lot of the copper work has been restored and replaced. You can see some of the original and manufactured tile All around us, you can see the copper flashing. You can see the first picture you got was a picture of the elk, I believe it is, that crowns one of the pinnacles here. And you can see a panoramic view of the Thousand Islands region looking back from Hart Island toward the shore around Alexandria Bay. You can tell that it is a busy area. You can take a look at Boldt Castle and some of the areas that are close by where we originally got on a launch to come to Hart Island today. You can look in both directions up and down the St. Lawrence River and wonder why this is a terrific summer playland from people from every state in the Union and other countries as well. It's a decent place. Every day is not as perfect as this day in July, but it's almost like somebody upstairs said, okay, Calvin and Gordy are going to the Thousand Islands. Let's give them a decent day so they can really put this area on display. We're obviously very proud of the Lake Champlain region, and we think more tourists should come to visit us in our little corner of northeastern New York. But for those of you who don't take time to venture away from your hometown, maybe it would be a good idea to just take a day or a weekend to come down to the Thousand Island region, and you'll find that it's pretty beautiful as well. This is a pretty dark place where we're located, right on the very top of Boldt Castle. This room is closed to the general public, although one board has been removed, so you can get a view what things are like here. You see various kinds of construction material strewn around inside. You see a roof, a little temporary wooden ladder of stairs that will go up through. You can see the remnants of steel pipes and giant steel girders that hold this thing together. And in the hallway here, although it's dark, you can see years and years and years of graffiti in layers that date back decades. I'm sure right back to the early part of this century. Whether or not much more restoration will be done at this level of the castle, I don't know. But you know what? It'll be an awful lot of fun to come back in years hence to find out. Well, if Calvin was able to make it up to the fifth and final cubbyhole on the top of this wonderful place, we knew he could make it back down to the basement. This is ground level in the strictest sense of the word. And unlike the castles in medieval Europe, there's no real dungeon here, although Calvin says you get that sense when you come down here. There are golden globes of light and small light bulbs just to give you a glimpse of what some of the nooks and crannies were like. Again, when I first came down here, this entire dirt area that we're standing on was strewn with tons and tons of litter. Parts of the old heating system and plumbing system were still in evidence. Calvin, just follow me as we walk over this way to give you an idea the size of this underground place and passages. There is a tunnel we're going to go into. Most of these rooms you can't see inside because they don't have proper lighting, but as we go around the staircase, we'll be able to walk into an area that was going to be an incredible swimming pool at one point in time. To the best of my knowledge, the swimming pool was never actually completed, but you will be able to get an idea, if you'll follow me, what it might have looked like had it been finished. I see now they do have some very nice grill work so that you can look inside, and I must say this water is a great deal cleaner than it was when I used to come here many years ago. Once again, it was completely filled with debris. People now have thrown quite a few coins into the water, and I'm not sure if your wish would come true if you threw a brochure down with a quarter on it, or is that a nickel? I can't tell. But they have done some restoration down here, just enough to let you know what it might have looked like. Just imagine coming down here on a nice warm summer morning in 1904, 1905, and just taking a flying leap right off the edge here and do a short lap around the pool and look out into the St. Lawrence River and get an idea. Actually, there's been a lot of stabilization work as I look around me, because this was a fairly unsafe area back 40 years ago and 50 years ago when I first began tours to Hart Island and the St. Lawrence River. So what you're seeing now is what it might have looked like when the work stopped in 1904. It's relatively dark down here as we're looking in a corner adjacent to the swimming pool. It's some of the original pipe work here, and you can see that that's at least 6 to 8 inch pipe. There were remnants of that pipe all through this basement area when I first started coming here, and you can imagine what a marvel it must have been in the late 1800s to have this kind of plumbing and heating system installed in a building this size. Once again, they were sparing no expenses to have the latest in heating and plumbing technology back in the early 1900s and late 1800s. It's kind of neat to see it the way it is today in 1999. I wish I had Mr. Sanford here to explain to me what all these things were, but those sure look like some kind of heating ducts to me. But they're giant. They'd be large enough for a person to crawl through. Some of these weren't accessible many years ago to people who came down here because they were simply so cluttered. And some of the adjacent rooms are still boarded up because I imagine they hold some of the old pieces that were to be used in construction of Boldt Castle way back when. There's so many different rooms, there's so many places to visit even on this level that it almost boggles the mind. We've seen many things and we're going to see many more as we continue our tour of Boldt Castle. I told you there were tunnels, and Calvin just mentioned before we start, I still think we ought to, watch your head, Calvin, I still think we ought to put a microphone on Calvin because with his childlike curiosity as is mine, he walked in, he said, can you imagine being 8 years old down here and using this as a playground and imagining you lived in medieval Europe in the 13th and 14th century? Absolutely incredible. And this is a tunnel with very neat archways, which we're going to enter in just a very few moments to show you how the restoration has taken place. And this will lead us outside into the area of the powerhouse and the Playhouse and many of the outbuildings that we haven't had a chance to see. You see that old ancient sign that says the power, this is the powerhouse, this is where we want to go but we want to go to the powerhouse too. So we're going to head down this way. Look at the arches, the brick arches here. There was very little lighting here when I first came down through here, but to get an idea how this tunnel works, we could see this tunnel from the boat as we approached Hart Island, and now you're looking at it from the inside out with beautiful currant bushes and flowers and vegetation on the island that might have been here the early part of the century. And at night it's kind of neat because they have giant spotlights that light up from outside. So I imagine, as you can imagine too, what an enchanting place this would be to have your wedding, huh? Maybe I put an idea into your head. And it pleases me that this is now a public place, that Boldt Castle and Hart Island belong to the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority, and that the monies you contribute to make your tours of Hart Island and Boldt Castle go almost exclusively into keeping it running and to paying for that very expensive restoration in amounts that already exceed $14 million. All this brickwork overhead is brand new. Most of this area was not covered in years gone by, not too many years gone by, so that's all been restored within the last short period of time. Voila. You got to admit, this is so much better than a still picture. Even the best color photograph could not begin to capture the ambiance and the feeling you get on Boldt Castle and Hart Island. Once you know the story of the Hart family and why and how this place was built and how construction stopped, and you began to fill in the blanks and you began to almost feel the charm. And hopefully throughout the course of this interview today, unedited as we take our own little informal tour of Boldt Castle and Hart Island, you can be transported back in time and imagine what life would have been like here almost 100 years ago. You're seeing a boat tour go by, one of the Uncle Sam boat tours. You're seeing in front of us something that has been completely restored. Hopefully you got a chance to look at some of the photographs, postcards, or pictures in the video which we showed you as a part of our little corner program about a half hour ago, to see that this particular powerhouse was in a tremendous state of disrepair. The roofs were gone, the rocks were into the water, and they literally took this stone out of the bottom of the St. Lawrence River and restored this, putting the new roofs on it and rebuilding it to the point where it's over 90% restored the way it was way back when to supply power for this entire facility back in the early 1900s. Doesn't this remind you of the nursery rhyme of Billy Goat's Gruff and the arch bridge, huh? But there's no nasty creatures underneath this beautiful little arch bridge. It's the bridge that leads from the mainland, the mainland at Hart Island, over to the powerhouse. For many years that bridge did not exist, so tourists were not able to even come over and touch the stones of the old powerhouse. And after the restoration was completed, this is one of the last things that was finished, this beautiful little arch bridge that took you into the powerhouse. And soon we'll go inside to see what it's all about. This is, to me, one of the more fascinating parts of the restoration of Boldt Castle and Hart Island, because this is the literal pulse of Boldt Castle. Before you, you're looking at some of the original electrical panels situated in the dynamo room used for the distribution of current. There are two kinds of electrical current. One is alternating current, AC, and one is direct current, known as DC, the kind you use in your batteries, in your car, in your motor home. And the alternating current is the kind we use in our regular homes today. When you use generators, you generate DC, and it must be converted for AC. Some of the great old machines here you can see broken down. This is a water-powered elevator control valve. That was donated by Iron Mountain for this facility, but much of the equipment that you see in this room is equipment that might have been used way back when. Beautiful water-powered elevator operating pressure gauge, old motors and valves, tremendous machinery. And this is a tastefully decorated room in the basement of the powerhouse, because above is a literal panorama of actual photographs. These are gas and diesel generators, typical of the kind that might have been used here. Give you an idea what the place looked like as it was actually being built. You can see the Boldt Yacht House under construction, and adjacent to that on the right hand side a photograph of Boldt Castle itself as it was being built in 1903, just 1 year before all construction stopped when Louise Boldt died. When I tell you that the powerhouse was deteriorated considerably, I wasn't kidding. And these photographs will bear out what I told you. To the left-hand side, if Calvin can move just a couple of steps over and take a look, is the beginning of the interior restoration 9 years ago. And it shows that there wasn't very much left of this part of the facility when the restoration began. Just to give you an idea how far we've come now in 1999. It's really a neat place to visit. You see before and after pictures. This is, as the legend beneath describes, the powerhouse before its destruction by fire in 1939. And after it was ravaged by fire, when it says time and the elements, those two factors were very much involved because there was no roof on the facility and it just was at the mercy of what happened over all those decades. And then rehabilitation of the powerhouse began sometime around 1986, and what you see is what you get today if you visit in 1995, 1999 or after the powerhouse and the property at Hart Island. We want to give you a number of views of almost everything there is to see here at the powerhouse and on Hart Island. This is also called the clock tower for an obvious reason. You see the weather vanes and the lightning rods atop these buildings. There was a fire in 1939 that destroyed this facility, and it lay in a decrepit state for many, many years before it was restored. But this is now standing on top of that little arch bridge that we showed you from beneath just a few minutes ago. There is a woodworking shop and cabinet maker shop on the second level of the powerhouse and clock tower. But it gives us an opportunity from the outside steps to look back on a beautiful summer day in July at Boldt Castle. Just to the left of the castle, behind V-shaped trees, you'll see a large shell shape that I think in its day was a fountain, although we'll get a closer look at that in a few minutes. On the other side of the island is the Playhouse, Alster Tower, which we'll get a look at and hopefully someday we'll see restored. On the other side of the river, the famous Boldt Yacht House, which you've seen pictures of under construction. And a lot of tourists, young and old, enjoying this day just doing touristy things on Hart Island. See, if I were tremendously clever, I would hum a few bars from the Threepenny Opera, or sing Pennies from Heaven, or Three Coins in a Fountain, or whatever. But this is a short view of that nice fountain that we took a long view of from the steps of the second floor at the powerhouse and clock tower in Hart Island. It is indeed a working fountain. I must say that this is the first time I've ever seen water actually coming from his mouth into that beautiful pool, and people are throwing pennies in there, and we've been sticking our fingers in there just to cool them down. Now you get a little view backwards of the powerhouse to see how it looks today. Calvin wanted me to sing I'm Henry VIII, I am, but I decided that wouldn't be a propitious thing to do. But this is the Henry that you heard about in the documentary done by public television in Watertown. There wasn't very much of this Henry existing when I first came here. It was just a rubble. But this just goes to show you what people with vision can do. And fortunately, most of the original architectural drawings meant for the completion of Boldt Castle and all of its outbuildings have been followed right to the level, right to the letter, and they're being used even today to restore this building. And the Henry is no exception, because as I understand, chickens and other fowl, including doves, are being kept in the Henry even as we speak. See, normally, had this been 1904 and video cameras had been invented and we were standing inside the dovecote, we probably wouldn't be looking up, would we, Calvin? But today, with no doves in here, I think we're relatively safe without umbrellas. You can get an idea what this interesting tower looks like, having been reconstructed basically in 1992. And as we walked in, I'm sorry we couldn't keep that lady. She had a wonderful voice. I thought it was a recording reading the legend on a plaque inside that says this was the first structure on the island built by the Boldts. The dovecote located on the east end of Hart Island, a large cylinder stone tower which housed a water tank and was capped with a dovecote. Closer inspection of the dovecote will show that the actual perches and pigeonholes that were constructed for the Boldt's fancy fowl. The dovecote, like so much of the rest of Hart Island, had deteriorated so badly that it was questionable if it could ever be saved. But as I said a moment ago, by the end of the 1992 operating season, the dovecote had been completely restored. This is a picture over here, circa 1940, to show you what it looked like originally. And over on the far wall, a picture of what it looked like before reconstruction in 1990, and as it looked through most of the times I visited Hart Island and Boldt Castle. Everywhere you look, there's something new and refreshing about Boldt Castle in 1999. You look at many of the balconies, which are completely new, which didn't even exist in previous years. You can tell they're slightly different colored stone. You look at the round windows in the upper floors and see the wonderful work around those windows. Truly amazing. You look at the copper work, which of course turns green, as we know from viewing the Statue of Liberty over the years. You see that. You see the magnificent brand new weather vane way on the top. Completely beautifully balanced on the top of Boldt Castle. You get a very good view here of some of the roof work that's been done, the towers that have been restored. So much has been done to make this a beautiful place to come and visit, and all in the interest of a museum. And as you know, one of the most important ingredients in this program called Our Little Corner and Hometown Cable is to preserve history, to talk to the people who've lived history before. They're not here to tell their stories anymore. And even though we haven't had a tour guide, except for my babbling throughout the course of this program, this is a building that speaks volumes all by itself. And I hope it's spoken a few volumes to you today and will inspire you to visit and to celebrate the history of our great nation, including tourist areas such as the Thousand Islands. Another good view of the castle and the extensive walkways. People and their pets are here. Groups of, I imagine, church youth groups are here, and clubs, tour boats, and tour buses have brought people to this facility. We're on Hart Island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, just almost a stone's throw from Alexandria Bay. We've almost completed our tour, but there is one place we haven't visited yet, and we're right on the outskirts. of the Alster Tower, otherwise known as the Playhouse. And the brochure says it was perhaps suggested by some old defense tower on the Alster River flowing through Hamburg, Germany. It's a curious mini castle. Probably wasn't pre-designed because it would be nearly impossible to describe the irregular forms on paper. More likely it was kind of improvised in a highly personal matter and evolved as it rose off of this island. Probably George Boldt himself was the real author of this imaginative and eccentric creation. As you've heard, his wife Louise shared a very keen interest that he had and great enthusiasm for all these projects. One can see here the ornate shell room, a carved stair and balcony, as well as the once used two-lane bowling alley in the basement, which we'll get to see in just a few minutes. Unlike the main residence, this whimsical playhouse was completed and occasionally occupied by the Boldt family, the parents, the son, the daughter, during the years when the castle itself was erected. It was also used as a guest house back in the early 1900s and late 1800s. If you visited Boldt Castle on Hart Island more than 10 or 15 years ago, you did not see anything like this in the place of this gazebo because it was literally a pile of rubble. But it's been recently restored to its original form and has been the setting, as you've heard in the course of this program, for literally dozens, maybe hundreds of weddings since it's been restored. One as recently as a couple of weeks ago, and one planned for tomorrow, which would be the 22nd day of July, 1999, with, I forgot what they said, 116 or 160 some guests. And the view behind us, and Calvin is now looking at it through the eyes of the camera, is the Alster Tower, otherwise known as the Playhouse. The word whimsical is used to describe it in the brochure, and I think that word fits beautifully. We'll take a look inside if you don't mind. At the outset of this program, we told you we try to leave some things on this island to your imagination. Guess what? This roving camera and its crew, made up of Calvin and Judy Castine and me, Gordy Little, who's he, have been sneaking and peering and looking into various nooks and crannies. And we're now approaching the Alster Tower, and I think I'm going to be amazed myself because much of this place has been restored, or at least brought to a place where we can go inside and enjoy it without fear of the roof falling down. It's kind of neat. Most of these rooms were completely inaccessible to me and my family the last time I came here, as much as 2 years ago. Look, you talk about the St. Lawrence sturgeon. You see that camouflaged next to that little boy? Isn't that neat? They have wonderful photographs in this place. When you consider, you hear people talk about the old-fashioned building techniques, and they mention plaster and lath. Look at these cracks in the building. You'll see what plaster and lath are all about. And brick. Plaster and lath and brick. This is before the days of sheetrock, right, Calvin? Which, by the way, in the summer of 1999 is a very rare commodity. Builders, homeowners are having great difficulty getting sheetrock for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the building boom and good economy in the United States and Canada, not to mention the various and natural disasters that we've had requiring a lot of rebuilding of homes and cities.
And if we can go back to Lake Champlain for a moment, there are many people who claim that Champy is really a sturgeon, and you can see the size of that sturgeon here in the St. Lawrence River.
I doubt if there's ever been a sturgeon that approached 40 to 50 feet in length with a head like a horse. Talk about imagination. Some of those Champy viewers must have had it in less. Champy is a true monster of Lake Champlain. I like to think that he is. All right, we'll walk and talk. I can see where I'm going with the microphone. Calvin has to look through the eyes of the camera, but he can do it. Now we're going into a lower level, and once again, this has been restored considerably since I was here the last time. And excuse me, as you look around, you can see the various kinds of construction that was here. You can see that the rehabilitation is underway even as we speak with scaffolding. You can also look down below and see the remnants of 2 bowling alleys. Somebody took the pins, but they were there at one time, and it's a lot cleaner than it looked the last time. We were able to walk actually down in there, but that area is closed off now while the workmen do their job in the bottom of this building. These brick columns have always fascinated me, to see how the archways were constructed of brick. A lot of these buildings had fireplaces in them, as you can see. Mostly on the side, each side, there were little staircases. Some of them are inaccessible now, but at one point or another in time, you were able to go down through there and take a look. Here's a tour boat approaching it's almost framed in the picture window in front of the Alster Tower, which faces out on the beautiful St. Lawrence River. Those are the clamoring throngs of people aboard the boat tours, checking out the Thousand Islands. You can see the interesting wrought iron lighting collection outside the Alster Tower. Very interesting view over our heads of the, shall we call them, clabbered or coddled clouds, and the tower that reaches up into the sky. A beautiful backdrop for a spectacular 21st day of July in 1999. This whole tour today is one that's made me feel good, and I hope in viewing it later we've captured the essence of some of that feel-good stuff for our viewers on Hometown Cable. Another little interesting hideaway corner of a little pool, maybe a goldfish pond or something, off the St. Lawrence River. This has also been restored since the last time I visited Hart Island. This gives you a riverside view of the Alster Tower. Some of the windows have not been replaced, as you can see, but they will be in due time, and most of the people who work here, including the administrator himself, say he hopes to see this completely restored in the next few years, and that would be nice because it's so much fun to look at outside and inside. And I hope if you're looking carefully through the lens of the camera, you can see some of the beautiful flowers, the cultivated and wild flowers, the daisies and the various other flowers that are part of the landscape here on Hart Island. Now this is pure speculation, but I would guess that this roof was designed so if you were to fall off the side of the tower, you'd only get about this far. And if you started to slide down this roof, baby, you would need serious help by the time you got to the bottom. If you're asking me for an explanation as to why this roof was built that way, I'm sorry, I don't have the faintest idea. Maybe it was inspired by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It kind of gives you that feeling, doesn't it? But this is another great view. Just look at the amazing cloud formations in the sky over the Thousand Island area, the way the clouds are put together, and the way this tower, the Alster Tower on Hart Island, where Boldt Castle is located, just kind of fits in with the backdrop of that spectacular July sky in 1999. And bear in mind that an amazing amount of restoration work has been done already on this tower. We told you we hope it's finished someday inside, and work is already underway. Very, very ambitious work. But in the meantime, It wasn't too long ago when you couldn't even walk around where we're walking now. Some of the archways on the underside are shown on the outside. So when you're walking, you better be looking up and looking down at the same time. Otherwise, your face and this concrete or cement beneath us are liable to get very close. Take a look around us. Just turn around, Calvin, and look at this boat that's going by called the Alouette. If that isn't a throwback to some ancient time. Some of the old tour boats from the 1920s and 30s and 40s are still in operation. And I've got to tell you, when it says Heritage Boat Tours, you got to agree that those old inboards are still working great after all of these years. Isn't that neat?
Look at that house with so little land.
Well, the beauty of it is you only need to make one short swipe with your lawnmower each time, and that's just for the plants that can grow in between the rocks. It's kind of amazing. As we were approaching the Thousand Islands region, Judy Castine said, "Look out there. There's a little tiny island with a house on it. Why would anybody do that?" Well, why do we try to climb mountains and scale the Alster Tower on Hart Island? Somebody built that house on a rock. I can't imagine what that must be like in the spring of the year. Hopefully they vacate the place in the wintertime and then come back and make massive repairs. I can imagine what blocks of ice must be. I don't think there'd be a finished basement in there, would you guess? That house is like many of the houses in Georgia, raised on stilts because they're wet half the time. But you certainly get a nice view of the St. Lawrence region from that little house. I have no idea who might own that or what its history might be, but almost every one of the older buildings on every one of the islands has a story. And many of those stories are told in the patter of the boat tour operators. So if you're ever up in the region, we're certainly not being paid to promote the region, but we're here and enjoying it. And if you want to come sometime, I would say a great place to start would be to take one of those comprehensive several-hour tours of the Thousand Island region in the St. Lawrence River, so you can fall in love with another part of northern New York through our program called Our Little Corner. This is the first time Calvin has let me sit down all day. Actually, Shane Sanford is taking us over to the Yacht House at the moment, and this is going to cap off the day's entertainment for Gordy Little and Judy and Calvin. Judy, it's been great, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
What did you like the best?
The whole thing.
Yeah, it's a package deal. Judy loves the gardens. You like the Italian gardens and all the flowers. And of all people to ask what those flowers were, she had to ask me. But fortunately, some of them had tags on them, and we were able to find out, and so we can tell folks we saw whatever we saw. But we did like everything we saw, and it must be a delicious experience for you as a newcomer, right?
Yes. Never been.
And it's equally fine for me, because each time I come back, I see an amazing revelation as I walk into a room that's restored, that was previously closed to tourist traffic. And so that's why returning is like a rebirth for me every summer or every couple summers. Of course, I spent a lot of childhood hours along this St. Lawrence River as I worked in Adventure Town, a western village that was less than a quarter mile from here. But that was many, many years ago. And it's nice to jog my memory, come back and see what's the same and to see what's different in 1999. With any luck at all, maybe Our Little Corner can make a return visit for Boldt Castle, Hart Island Chapter 2 in another year into the brand new millennium. We'll be approaching the Yacht House and taking you for a look inside in just a moment. Now we are inside the Boldt Castle Yacht House. Shane, no wonder you wanted to bring us over here. This is so neat.
Yes, it is. It's quite a unique structure. It's a large-scale yacht house built by George Boldt and completed in 1899. It is on the list of the National Register of Historic Places. Quite a bit of rehabilitation application has been applied to this structure. We were able to open it up for the first time in 1996 to the public. It contains several, as you can see, antique boats, 3 of which were originally owned by George Boldt himself. And the rest of the boats, well, even the boats that were owned by George Boldt, are on loan to us by the Antique Boat Museum located in Clayton, New York, which probably has the world's largest collection of freshwater inland boats, wooden boats.
It's kind of a neat place over there, and I haven't been back to Clayton in a long time, even though I lived there way back in the 1950s, but this is wonderful in here. I can't even imagine how much work it took to put this place back together.
Well, there was quite a bit of work completed here. However, the Boldt Yacht House, as I said, was completed versus Boldt Castle, which wasn't completed. So even though the properties had deteriorated, it wasn't as great an effort as we have had to put forth at the castle. Yes, there was certainly still alone a tremendous effort here, but again, being completed, most of the fabric was still in existence.
The reason for these big, tall doors is so they could accommodate some of those tall steam yachts, right?
Exactly. The steam yachts had auxiliary sail power, and the large doors would open all the way to the peak of the building, allowing those sail masts on the steam yachts to come into the structure itself.
Shane, I want to know how you got associated with this organization. You told me you've been here for a long time. How did that all start for you? Where are you from?
Well, I'm originally from Alexandria Bay, New York. And in 1984 was the first year that the authority began a rehabilitation program. The first several years of ownership, beginning with the winter of 1977, was really a general cleanup of the properties. As you had mentioned, they were in such disrepair that they first had to be made safe for any future visitation. So in 1984, when a rehabilitation program was finally put in place, it called for the position of a full-time operations manager. And luckily I was asked if I was interested in the position, and I was and still am. and this is how I came to have this position, and it's been a real enjoyable experience.
So you never wandered too far from home, right?
Well, no, I've been in northern New York State for all my life. Yeah, I've been across the country at least once on a short year-long trip, but other than that, yeah, I'm a northerner.
You know, as I said before, we live up in the Lake Champlain region, and this kind of area gets in your blood, and this Thousand Island region certainly becomes a part of your fabric before very long, and you can wander away, but a lot of people like to come back.
Well, that's true. I mean, you can't be, if you grew up on this river, and I speak for many people,
sure,
that if you're away from this river too long, especially during the summer months, it really calls you back. I mean, it is a beautiful river. The Thousand Island region, certainly is second to none in terms of boating and recreation. As you can see today, and this certainly is the ideal situation, weather for this time of year, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful place to be.
After all these years and all that hard work on your part, does it please you when you see people going through and they don't know you run the place, and you listen and they say, "Wow, this is awesome"?
Well, certainly it does, and those comments, unsolicited, are the best. Certainly when they're in a positive form. But we make mental recordings of those comments, and those are passed along to the authority, whose decisions to keep improving this property, this attraction, are always decisions since I've been here to move ahead, continue on.
Decisions are changing all the time. I'm sure in the beginning the authority had no idea. I don't think that they would even do this much.
Well, that's true. That's very true. Certainly 21 years ago, the board members at that time, of which there are still some of the original board members that were on the board during the time the authority was first gifted these properties, probably didn't think that they would be this far. Maybe, and certainly their decisions to move ahead with the rehabilitation programs have paid off huge dividends for the regional tourism industry. I mean, the castle is probably the most recognized landmark, if you will, in the Thousand Island region today.
Information is accessible even via the internet, as we found out last night.
Oh yeah, we have our web pages for both Boldt Castle and the Thousand Island Bridge Authority. I think, and we get a lot of inquiries through that our web pages, and information is provided to those far outside the area, on the castle, on the bridges, on the Thousand Island region, its attractions, its accommodations, its restaurants.
There are a few of these restored, these wonderful heritage boats still running up and down this river. Every now and again you'll see one go by, and you know that somebody did a beautiful, painstaking job in restoring them. It's great to see them still on the river, isn't it? Oh,
it is, and there are quite a few on the river. As I said, the Antique Boat Museum, located in Clayton, New York, just 10 miles from here, has a large membership, and many of those members obviously have the antique boats that they've painstakingly restored and kept in condition. We have the Thousand Island chapter of the Antique and Classic Boats Society, and yeah, there's a large number of people owning these wooden boats that were so prevalent on the river during a different era. This whole Thousand Islands region has a certain mystique and charm, and hopefully by way of this little hometown cable program, parts of the population of Clinton, Essex, and Franklin counties will get a look at this Thousand Island region. Some of those people for the very first time, and maybe we can entice a few of them over here to visit you in the future. Well, that'd be great. We would love to have people come and visit us. You know, this whole northern New York State is a great and beautiful area to visit and to live. And we certainly welcome persons from other regions to come and visit the Thousand Island region. Enjoy themselves, and maybe take home a few memories. Yeah, maybe a few souvenirs. I'm looking over to our left, and I see a collection, fantastic collection. Let's mosey over there as we talk. We have a collection of outboard motors, and as I told you, up in much of my childhood around the Thousand Islands region, around Messina, Clayton, lived in Alexandria Bay in the 50s, and I can remember some of these in the back of fishing boats. These bring back. Yeah, they're a little bit. That's okay. But again, these antique outboard motors are a loan from us from the Antique Boat Museum, of which they have a huge collection of. But they present themselves well here in Boldt Yacht House, and yes, a lot of people visiting the Boldt Yacht House can remember when. Just like you had mentioned, I remember when my father took me out fishing, and this is the motor we had, or we fished in a boat very similar to this one, and it brings back memories to a lot of people who've moved outside the region and fortunately come back to visit. Yep, technology is wonderful, and the new motors certainly don't look very much like these. These are wonderful, but throughout my childhood and my adult life, I've seen a lot of boat races on the St. Lawrence River, and believe me, back in the early part of the century, some of those boats would fly. Oh yeah, even the Gold Cup racers at the turn of the century, you were hitting speeds of 50, 60 miles an hour, and
Think about that on the water.
Yeah, and that was, they're just developing the planing hull back then. It's quite a feat. Those are, tremendous speeds given that time. Do you do much boating on yourself? I notice you're very adept at putting the lines up when you come in here. But do you sail, or do you do any real serious boating? I'm a power boater. Are you really? I wouldn't be real good in a sailboat, other than I would probably know how to handle the lines. I try to get on the river as much as I possibly can. I think that might say it in a nutshell. Whenever I can, I want to be on the river.
I think it calls you. I think it really calls you. You have a passion for this area, and it shows.
Yeah, well, particularly given a day like today.
Oh yeah, this is.
I think I want to be on the water. And, you know, this job, obviously, even on the company's time, allows me to be on the river quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's a very fortunate experience, like I said, that I have day in, day out, and the many visitors that we get to interact with. It's, you know, you got to like people, and you got to be able to welcome the public, and again, just the experiences that you have with individuals and groups that come, very interesting to say the least.
Well, Calvin's wife said, "How can anybody come here without having a lasting, making a lasting impact on you? Makes you want to come back again and again." And I've done it. She's never seen it before, so it's a special thrill. It's a great thrill for me to come back and see the progress that's been made. I want to also congratulate the Bridge Authority, you and all the people here, for giving us a view of history through these enlarged photographs on the grounds and here in the boat in the yacht house. Those are great.
Well, thank you very much, and I think they do tell a story of a bygone era in the Thousand Islands, but we're also showing people too who visit the Thousand Islands for the first time, you know, the beauty that is here, and it's always been here, and that will hopefully always remain. And on behalf of the Thousand Island Bridge Authority, thank you for coming and visiting us. We really appreciate your visit. And again, if your viewers see this and would like to come and visit the Thousand Islands, please come as our guest. We'd love to have you.
That's great. And what a great way to wrap it up, huh? Let me tell you that I have no idea what. Well, we're going to wrap up this edition of our little corner outside the Boldt Castle Yacht House with a picture of the weather vane, a picture of the castle over our shoulder, and Shane Sanford over here. Before we leave, I want to mention the prices for the people who might be planning to make a trip up here. It's relatively inexpensive to go through Boldt Castle, and it's such a worthy way to spend your money.
Yes. Well, our admission rates, so we feel are very reasonable. They are $3.75 for an adult, $2 for children, ages 6 through 12. There is an additional charge for the tour boat companies to bring you over here. In any event, for more regional information, you can call 1-800-8-ISLAND.
I love it. What was that again?
1-800-8-ISLAND.
That's very easy to remember. Again, Shane, thanks so much for inviting us here today. I can't think of a better way to spend a summer day.
Well, thank you for coming. It was very pleasurable having you here.
Thanks to the weatherman and the man upstairs and whoever else might be responsible. Thanks to Judy and Calvin and the North Country for making this program possible. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.